Aloha, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Civil Beats Ideas Live show for Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. As the show is called, it's the live show. We are live, and we welcome you to send us through this next hour that we'll be discussing plastic. Any comments that you have, any questions that you have. Today's show was created in response to an essay that Nicole Chatterson wrote for us at Civil Beat that ran on January 18th. Nicole's essay was entitled 5 Ways We Can Move Away from Single-Use Plastics. And Nicole is the executive director of Zero Waste Hawaii, and we're really happy that she is here with us today. Aloha, Nicole, and thank you for being here. And we're also joined by her colleague, the executive director of Zero Waste Washington, Heather Trim, who is here from Seattle. Thanks so much for being with us. And we're really happy to have from halfway around the world, from Cologne, Germany, we have Joachim Quoden here. And Joachim is the managing director of a nonprofit alliance that has 27 members from 25 countries called EXPRA, and it deals with waste. Joachim will tell us about the work that they do in Europe and elsewhere in the world, Canada, Turkey, Chile. We're going to spend this next hour really looking at plastic. Plastic was invented in 1907, the first fully synthetic plastic. So in the history of the planet, that is no time whatsoever. It really didn't become widespread, the use of it, until the 1960s. And now, as we know, plastic is everywhere. It's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the seas, it's in the land. It is, as Captain Charles Moore calls it, the lubricant of globalization. And it has created all kinds of repercussions environmentally. So, we like to start these shows by inviting everyone who's joining us to tell us a little bit about themselves and how they came to be connected to the issue that we're discussing, which today is plastic. So Nicole, since you wrote the essay, since you're here in Hawaii, would you start us off by telling us a little bit about how you first became interested in plastic and how you came to be the executive director of Zero Waste Hawaii?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you, Julia, for having me on the show today. So I grew up in a town called Palmdale, which is about an hour and a half outside of LA in Southern California. And I grew up less than a mile away from our local landfill. So I watched this mound of trash grow into a mountain of trash, and also watched the field across from our house become an informal dumping ground. There are lots of reasons. People weren't bringing their waste to the landfill. It was costly. Some items weren't taken, and people didn't know what else to do with them. So I grew up with trash as an unusually prominent part of my childhood. Fast forward a couple decades later, I found myself studying environmental science and policy at Cal State Long Beach, which is where I became connected with Captain Charles Moore and the Algalita Marine Research Foundation. And for those of you who are not familiar with them, they're one of the leading voices that started to raise concern around plastic accumulating in the North Pacific Gyre. So Captain Moore was doing sailing at the time between California and Hawaii, and noticed he was sailing through a soup of plastic waste. So I eventually finished my degree and had the opportunity to sail with Algalita to Hawaii and up to Papahanaumokuakea, the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and saw for myself what was going on out there, and that solidified my path. It's something you can't unsee. It's, even at the moments when we didn't see large chunks of waste, there were microscopic pieces of waste, and we would trawl a net behind the boat, and every time we brought that out, even when we thought the water was clean, there were microplastic particles in the nets. And here I am about another decade later, and that's the trip that connected me with Hawaii. And I've since worked throughout the sustainability field with a focus on waste reduction. And within the past year, became executive director of Zero Waste Oahu, which I co-founded with a bunch of awesome other folks to address the need to move upstream and stop waste before it starts.
Okay, thanks so much. Heather, do you want to tell us about your work in Washington and how you came to be involved with plastics?
Well, ironically, similar to Nicole, I'm Texan, but I lived in Los Angeles for quite a long time, and I worked as a regulator for the state of California. I'm a geochemist and worked on water pollution. And I got super involved with Charlie Moore way back when he was just starting and when he was not being taken seriously. People did not really believe him at that point. And I was working on water quality and looking at all of the massive amount of litter, especially plastics, that were coming down the rivers and then washing back up on the beaches in LA. It's unbelievable, really. And of course, you now see that all over the world more and more. But then I moved up here to Washington State, and I'm now, for the past 4 years, executive director of Zero Waste Washington. And our goal is to pass laws across the city, across the state, and at the city and county level to address zero waste issues. And what has really been at the forefront lately has been addressing our recycling crisis and the plastics crisis as #1 big issues. And I'll say more about that later. But it's just ironic that we all have this kind of connection back to Charlie Moore.
Yeah.
It shows how powerful he has been. I remember interviewing him for a story years ago when the junk first arrived, and maybe we'll even talk a little bit about the voyage of the junk, but just a true pioneer. Joachim, we've come to you.
Yeah.
I know it's 1 o'clock in the morning where you are. It's so wonderful that you're joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your own experiences there in Europe with plastic and how you came to work with EXPRA and what EXPRA does?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm now in this sector since more than 28 years, and I'm a lawyer by profession, and by chance during my legal education in 92, the end of 92, so decades ago, I was working for the German Ministry of Environment. And in these days, they had just launched the first packaging bill, so-called packaging ordinance, which was obliging those companies putting packaging on the market to organize and finance the take back of the used packaging, their sorting and their recycling. So I was by chance working for the head of department as assistant, as thousands of people, companies, everyone had questions about this new ordinance, this new idea, producer responsibility. So within a very short time, I really became a little expert in this. And when I had to move in my legal education to the next stage, the German green dot system, the first EPR system in the world, they asked me, please join us already now. You are allowed to work some hours extra besides your education and help us in our legal department, because you are one of the few who knows how the ordinance is written. After I finished my legal education, they made me an offer I could not refuse. So suddenly I was an in-house lawyer. And in the legal department, we also had the responsibility to take care of international affairs, luckily. So I saw the system in France being founded, in Belgium, in Sweden, in Austria. So we decided together with the other starters that it is time to have a European network, a European umbrella organization. So we founded it in 95 in Brussels, and very quickly most of the countries of the European Union had such systems, and they joined this first umbrella organization. And by chance, I was moving to the European level in 2001. So and these were the days when perhaps you remember the change in Eastern Europe, when all the countries became free and they wanted to join the European Union. If you want to join the European Union, you have to implement European legislation, environment legislation, and inter alia, the packaging directive. So we offered our expertise to all these accession countries how to implement this packaging directive. And suddenly you saw more EPR systems for packaging popping up in all these accession countries. So step by step, this first umbrella organization were growing. At a certain moment in time, in 2013, most of the members decided that it is time to really promote non-profit owned by industry, owned by those who are paying for the service, that this should be the mantra, the religion, the best way to implement an EPR system. So EPR system means that you have a collective entity that collects money from those companies putting packaging on the market. So the usual suspects, the Unilevers, the Proctors, the Mars, Colgates, but also from the retailers, to collect from them money and to use it, usually together with local authorities, to finance the collection, the sorting, and the recycling of packaging. And of course, mainly of plastic. Packaging as a big part and usually the most challenging part, but the collection of glass, paper, and metal is not as easy as you think as well. So they all have their challenges, and there's always a need for some subsidies to create this circle. And somehow the EPR systems, my members, are in the middle of the circle, and their job is to keep this circle turning. And especially in times like today, where the virgin oil price is ridiculously low, of course you have to inject more money to keep the circle growing. Or in times when China had closed the border and stopped to recycle our dirty waste, of course the recycling at home is more expensive. So again, you have to inject more money in the circle to keep it growing. So that's what we do at the moment. Of course, we do this typical lobbying in Brussels for the European Union, but luckily my major job is to force my members to speak to each other, to work together, to exchange failures, to exchange best practices, so we are all able to solve the problem one day, and to upgrade our system step by step.
Okay. That idea of extended producer responsibility, I would love Nicole or Heather, if you could talk about, thanks Joachim for explaining for our viewers what that is. Do we have anything like that in the United States? Is that something, Heather, you could answer?
I can go first. So we do not have extended producer responsibility for packaging, but we have, I think, about 138 laws for e-waste and medicine return and mercury light bulbs and things like that. So we do have in a variety of ways, but we don't have the one for packaging, which gets at this issue of plastics. And now there are 10 bills that have been introduced in different states, including Hawaii and Washington State, among others, to do EPR, or extended producer responsibility for packaging. And it's very exciting. Big change on the horizon here.
Okay. So coming back to Joachim, if you could just speak to that, how big of a difference when you laid out for us how you went from being a legal student, this has been your entire career by default almost. How big of a difference did it make in the countries that you're working in when this EPR legislation came in?
Yeah, I can, of course, especially speak for my German experience, because I was there when the system was started, and I can tell you that especially in the beginning there was a big enthusiasm of the inhabitants as well, that they were able to do something with their waste. They were used to sort already glass, and paper was collected by charities and so on, but all in a quite unstructured way. And now this was done in a structured way. Every household received a special bin for their plastic waste, for their Tetra Paks, and for their metal containers, on top of the glass containers and the paper bin. So suddenly the people were able to do something, and that was very well perceived. And if you start to sort your packaging, you become aware what you are producing. If you just put all your trash into the usual residual bin, you are not really being aware of the amounts of waste that you are producing. So that was a quite good impression to see that the people were starting to discuss about their plastic waste for the first time. And this is 30 years ago, a long time before we have all the discussions now, the good discussions about plastics. And even our pupils are trained and taught in school that this has to be done and for which reason, and they should do it and so on. And always connected with the demand. Please think about whether you really use or need this packaging when you go shopping. So I think it's a combined effort which opens the door for further action, to discuss and to think about, do we need all the things that we are buying? So it's a combined effort, and this I have seen in many countries. There's a discussion for the first time, and of course everybody knows it better. It's I always say it's like in football, which is, or in soccer, which is so important for Germans, and you have 82 million national trainers knowing it better than the professional ones. And in packaging waste management, I feel it's exactly the same, but it's good because you have a discussion and you have a, I think you call it, you have a hook where you can jump on and when you can start to do the things.
Right. Well, and I suppose, I mean, what I hear you talking about is that's about individual awareness and people becoming aware.
That's the individual awareness.
I think, and I was also thinking just about, when we think about the producers and the producers' responsibility in this system, which is something different. But I want to bring Nicole in here. Here's a question that we've received from Jennifer. It can be a question for all of you, but Nicole, maybe you can think about this, have thought about this. The question from Jennifer is, can guests speak to effective models of EPR? Again, that's extended producer responsibility, and reusables that we might recreate here in Hawaii?
Yeah, great question. I'll start that off with some numbers from some local numbers that will help us realize how much plastic material we have that could be eliminated or greatly reduced through EPR. And that plastic material we have is currently going into our incinerator on Oahu, or on other islands, it's being put straight into landfills. So on Oahu, and I don't have all of the island stats up right now, but we have 35,000 tons of plastic film and wrap. So that's just one type of plastic. And out of all of the waste we produce, it's the 9th most prevalent item by weight. And when you think about how light plastic film is, think about your Snickers wrapper or your Ziploc bag, that is a lot of plastic film. And so the need for us to engage our producers in helping to manage that, because that's a huge cost to us, is monumental. We have a long way to go. And I'll leave it to Heather and Joachim to talk more about other models that have worked well. I know from sitting on the state plastic source reduction working group last year, which was a multi-stakeholder group that came together to figure out how we can reduce our local plastic waste. EPR was one of the top things that came up, and we were pointing to the models elsewhere to help us think about what we could do locally. I know Belgium is often held up as a great example, and I know in the United States, we're still working on what's going to land best for our communities.
So you mentioned Belgium, and so you know, there's this idea that Belgium is perhaps the most successful country in the world currently for the way that it's handling its waste. And again, I want to emphasize that, you know, plastic is a subset of waste. We're really talking about plastic today, but I know that they're very much connected. But maybe whether Heather or Joachim, who maybe both are familiar with what's happening in Belgium and can speak to this, but can you tell us, share with our viewers, what is it that Belgium's doing that's making them the most successful country in the world at the moment?
Joachim, you go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, they have built up a collection system for all, for the whole territory of Belgium, where all people in the meantime collect their packaging waste in the same way. So all have this blue sack in which they put plastics, Tetra Paks, and metals, combined with this paper collection and glass collection. The people are trained to do it. Forst Plus, the Belgium system, is rolling out now collection systems, not only at home, but wherever you are consuming your packaging, in offices, leisure areas, parks, train stations, and so on. So that you have a chance to get rid of your packaging in the best way. And it's more places you have where you can sort your packaging, as less you are littering, because litter is a disaster for the environment. So one tool to fight against litter is to have the good infrastructure to avoid it, besides communication, awareness, enforcement. So all these measures together, then you are able to reduce litter. Unfortunately, we have not found the magic solution to stop it. Perhaps then we have to go to Singapore, where the people are too afraid to litter, because they know that they end up in prison. But I think this is not a way that we would like to go. I think we still believe in the brains and the mood of our people. So, but that's why Belgium is the front runner, because they really have rolled out the system to nearly 100%, and that's where most of the other countries are still struggling to roll it out. And then I think, of course, there are 100 new tools that we can do in addition, because the way to real circularity is still very, very long. This is a marathon and not just a 100-meter speed race.
Right. Well, so let's talk about that issue of circularity. I know, Nicole, that in your piece, you really mentioned very specifically about single-use plastics. And so there are all different kinds of plastics used for all kinds of different things. But I think that maybe a lot of people would agree that the lowest hanging fruit and the biggest issue are the single-use plastics, which lead to the kind of litter that you're talking about, Joachim. So Nicole, can you talk to us a little bit about what's happening with single-use plastics in Hawaii, both in terms of behavior and in terms of legislation?
Sure, great question. So Hawaii was one of the first states to have statewide plastic bag policies in each county. So that happened a handful of years ago. Many of you may have noticed some loopholes in that policy that left us with double thick plastic bags, which were marketed as reusable. So a lot of those loopholes are now being closed. And that was an exciting early win for us. More recently, we've seen a lot of traction around single-use plastics in the food service sector. So many of our counties are moving forward with some type of single-use plastic restriction when it comes to dining. And I can speak in most detail about Honolulu's Ordinance 1930, formerly known as Bill 40. And that passed in 2019 and is set to take effect in April of this year, which is really exciting. And it has two phases. So phase one it requires all of our restaurants to get a positive confirmation from customers that they want single-use takeout. So it requires that the single-use takeout utensils, are not plastic, not fossil fuel plastic. And it also requires that for the customer to get a compostable alternative, they need to say, yes, I actually want this. And that to me has a profound possibility for impacting our behavior, because it asks us to pause and do what Joachim has been talking about. Do I actually need this? And oftentimes the answer is no. I'm taking this takeout to my home or the office and I have utensils there. Or I have my handy utensil kit with me that can replace these single-use items. And the next part of Bill 40 graduates to us leaving behind several other types of single-use plastic packaging, which is exciting because it creates room for innovation and for other materials to pop up. But it also reinforces us to continue to ask ourselves, why are we using this material and do we need it? When is packaging for marketing more so than safety and preservation? And this bill opens up all of those conversations for us. I'll briefly add too that in Honolulu, this bill has not yet taken place, and we already see restaurants with single-use utensils by request only as a prominent feature on their ordering platforms. So I can think of about a dozen restaurants that I love and frequent who have already taken the initiative to do it because it's saving them money. You know, they're not having to spend on these one-time convenience items.
Mm-hmm.
And what about, just for our viewers in Hawaii, I know that there have been some restaurants that have expressed opposition to this measure because they feel that it's going to have a negative economic effect on them, that it will just be too challenging economically. So can you speak to that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons why we know that's not the problem, a problem in the way that some restaurants are fearing, is a local group here, the Surfrider Foundation Oahu chapter has been running something called the Ocean Friendly Restaurants Program for several years now. And that program is actually in several other states at this point. And all of those restaurants have not been using polystyrene foam or plastic utensils. And there are several other criteria they have to meet, and those restaurants were wildly successful. And instead of customer pushback, they're seeing customer engagement and customer approval. People want to be doing the right thing, and there's this big tension with our desire for convenience and that resulting in negative impacts. And so when we can help customers minimize their negative impacts, which takeout is always going to have an impact, but if we can minimize that, the customers feel better, the restaurants feel better, our community thrives, our land and our oceans thrive. And so we've seen a lot of success already with that. In fact, we had many small local restaurants as some of our key proponents of Bill 40 passing, because they've been walking the walk, and in many ways felt that it was unfair for restaurants to artificially lower the price of their food because they're using cheap plastic that's causing all of these costs and impacts down the line. And so they're excited to see their counterparts invest in better alternatives.
Okay. You know, Heather, I would love to bring you in here as a geochemist, because one of the things that I am really curious about, I imagine the viewers are curious about, is looking at what might be coming next. What could potentially replace plastic? And we start off by saying the first fully synthetic plastic wasn't even on the scene until 1907. Didn't really become used in a widespread way until the 1960s. So, you know, at the same time, we have this global economy that is so incredibly dependent upon the material of plastic at the moment. So I'm just really curious, are there new materials that are coming online? Are there innovations that potentially will not have the negative environmental impact that plastic does?
Yes, let me build that answer a bit. So a lot of people don't even know that plastic is made of oil and gas, and oil and gas are inherently toxic. A lot of people don't even know that. And many plastic products are actually made with they're made with additives that then can migrate into the food, like phthalates and some other toxic chemicals. So this is part of the reason why we want to move to either reducing them altogether, like bring your own bag, bring your own thermos, and also moving to new materials that are safer and are inert, don't have that migration potential into your food, and are replacements. So a great example is styrofoam. Styrofoam is, or styrene, or expanded polystyrene, is itself not toxic, except that they have residual styrene in the styrofoam product. So if you drink hot coffee out of a styrofoam cup, you have the potential to migrate that styrene into your coffee. Hot things migrate more, oily things migrate more. And styrene was listed in 2018 as a probable carcinogen after 40 years of debate. So the problem is we're talking about toxic chemicals in some of these products. So what do we do about styrofoam? So there are these cool new products that are coming online, innovations. One is making a styrofoam replacement out of a mushroom kind of thing. So you could use that for the packaging. And another one is making it out of chitin. And I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but it's the material that aquatic organisms use to make their shells. So there are these really great new things that are coming online that could really help replace styrofoam. Although we really want people to bring their own. We want to just simply go to reuse as the best solution. The other thing is that you know how you wrap they wrap cucumbers in plastic. That makes the cucumber last longer. So that's a good thing from the point of view of food waste and food safety. But there's this new product called a peel, and they spray it on or they put it on. It's a coating, and it's made out of algae, and you can eat it. And so it creates the function of protecting the cucumber and giving you that longevity, but it also is something that's safe and you could eat as well.
So, like, how widespread is that? For example, where are they actually doing that? Where you are in Washington, if you go out and buy a cucumber, are you seeing that?
Not yet, but this is a great question for Joaquin, because where I've seen it is in the UK and in Europe. So have you seen these? And maybe there are other innovations I don't even know about.
I think that's one of the charming for EPR as well, because if you give the end of life management a price which is incorporated in the purchasing price, of course you offer a way for alternatives as well. So especially in the next step of EPR, we are now differentiating our fee structure. Up to now, we were just differentiating between the packaging materials. So plastics had a different price than metals, glass, and paper. Now we are starting to differentiate in between plastics, for example. Just to make it clear, very easy example, a clear PET bottle has of course different costs for the management than a multi-layer flexible plastic film. So by differentiating the EPR fees, of course you can give motivation and access for new solutions which are then better for the environment and then also for the economics, because funnily very often on the mid-run or the long-term run, these in the beginning more expensive solutions are much cheaper on the long run. So we have to give the externalities a price, and then I think better solutions have a better chance to come in. Like for the restaurants, if you charge for the forks, if you charge for the expensive one-time packaging to the restaurants, then I think the reusable options have a better level playing field, even economic wise. So it is one part of our strategies, I think, to a better behavior in a more circular world where we not only just buy, consume, and throw it away. It's one part of the solution we believe. But of course, as you said, we always have to be careful not to overshoot somehow. If we get rid of plastics, it should not cause more food waste and so on. So we should always have a new solution for it. So that's sometimes difficult to keep the balance.
So I think, what that question when we started with that was the idea of innovation. What are things that are coming online, things that, for example, we all as consumers, the sort of thing where we would go out and we would just look at it and we would say, oh my God, that's great. That's innovative. It's exciting. And I understand what you're saying about Joachim, about the way that if you build in for the producer a cost to responsibility all the way through the system to the end, then they're much more likely on the front end to want to see that packaging be a lot more environmentally friendly, because it's going to be easier for them to manage at the end of life. Heather, where you are in Washington, of course, we know that there is a very, very, very ever larger corporation called Amazon, which is now sending things all over the world. So there are a couple of things with this. One is, when you get that level of scale, one corporation can make a big difference. So I'm really curious. I can only believe that in Washington, you're thinking about what sort of an impact you could make if you changed the way that Amazon was packaging things. And I know they're global, that they just happen to be headquartered where you are. But I wonder if you would speak to Amazon, both the specifics of what they themselves are doing, but then as an example of how the producer fits into this whole picture.
Sure. Okay. And for starters, one thing we've seen with COVID is a big change in the type of packaging that is going into the recycling facilities. Lots and lots more cardboard from all of the deliveries that are coming to people's homes, relative to the lesser packaging when they had going to stores. So Amazon is a great example because they actually are trying. They are trying to reduce their waste because the finger is pointed at them so much. And one thing they did is they innovated. It took them several years to create this white and blue pouch. It's a mailing pouch that's got a kind of a bubble wrap conception to it. And they were very proud of it, and they rolled it out. And by using that, they would be able to have tighter packaging around the products and less of that airspace around boxes. They could put more things in their trucks, and they were creating this plastic pouch that they thought was going to be basically recyclable. The problem is that it couldn't go to our recycling facilities. It didn't separate correctly. It separated as paper, and so it was going into the paper bales, and so it was contaminating the paper bales. So that was basically a missed opportunity. And the other problem is that the label, you have to peel the label off in order to take it back to the store for recycling. So then they did more innovation, and they came up with a craft paper concept. So it's a craft colored envelope, mailing envelope, delivery pouch that has a puffiness, and the puffiness is that glue that you normally have in cardboard blown up. So they made it into like a sponge. So when you have regular cardboard, you have two sides and you have a zigzag, and there's a little bit of glue in there. So they thought that glue would be okay for the paper mills, for the pulp mills. Turns out that pouch is not something the pulp mills want, because there's too much glue that a little bit would have been okay, but it messes up their recipe to have all that glue coming in those pouches. So those pouches are not going to be a very good thing for recycling. So the challenge we have is the designers are kind of over here in their silo designing things, and the recyclers over here in their silo, and there's not this good communication between the two to make sure that the solutions are really going to be taking care of the end of life. Yeah. So I do want to say one thing about Amazon. In Europe, not so much here, but it's more here, but in Europe, they have a requirement that the vendors have to provide them things in boxes that can go all the way to the consumer. They don't have to add an extra box around it. And that would be great to have all over the entire world.
Yeah. So two comments, if I may, from my my side. The first comment with regards to the connection between the packaging designers and the recyclers at the end of life. This is extremely important. And usually my members, most of my members have a special department to try to help the packaging designers to understand what is happening with their packaging once they have sold it to the consumer. And even better, in the last 2 or 3 years, the value chain has founded special platforms to bring all the value chain members to one table and to work together, like, for example, C-Flex for flexible packaging, because it was understood that flexible packaging was nearly, even if it was collected, it was going very often to incineration or to cement kilns. So now we are working there to change this, because there are technical applications to recycle flexible packaging. So I think this is extremely important to improve the management of each kind of packaging. For the online sales, this is a dramatic change for all our end of life systems as well. So not only for the inhabitants and the companies and so on, but you have suddenly companies from all over the world selling into your country. So for the consumer, it is probably great to have the choice between 100 different suppliers, probably cheaper as well. You never know how the product is produced and what are the conditions for the workers. Okay, but also for the end of life, it is very different, because these companies are very often not complying with their EPR obligations. How can we trace all the companies in China, in the US, from Europe, and wherever? In Germany, a research was done, and it was found that between 300 and 500,000 companies are selling online into Germany, which is incredible number, and difficult, of course, then to become under or to get them under EPR. But if the 10 biggest platforms, the marketplaces, would take care, you would have control over more than 80% of these companies. So one of the ideas, which is already done in France and in Germany, is to make the platforms responsible. And so Amazon in Germany is, for example, asked now to take care of all their suppliers. They have the data, they have the power, they have the knowledge, because they are data experts in the end. That's their core business. So that's how some countries try to ensure that there's a level playing field between the local companies and all the companies from all over the world.
Yeah, and so that's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would like to offer another thought on this conversation about packaging and shipping. So my mother-in-law, who's a weaver, recently ordered some yarn that came in a darling hodgepodge of packaging. So there was a plastic slip over one set of yarn that was different from the plastic slip over the other set of yarn. And it was in a box not branded by the yarn company. And what we found when we opened it up was a wonderful description of how that yarn company saves the packaging it inherits from purchasing inputs or equipment. And then they tell the story of how they're trying to do their best to reuse, which is above the waste management hierarchy from recycling, right? Recycling is the third thing you want to do after reducing and reusing. And so they're like, hey, we're going to give this a try. And we're giving up some of our preconceived branding notions that you must receive from us a box clearly branded with our name and, tell us what you think. And I thought that was, that in my opinion, is exactly the type of thing we need to see more of. How do we get our marketers to become infinitely more creative and, you know, let go of the Amazon logo on the envelope and see if there are ways we can be more authentic about circularity and about reuse.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I wanted to bring up, because it's so specific to Hawaii, I mean, plastic is everywhere, but because we're an ocean, you know, we're surrounded by the sea, we're islands, we really deal a lot with microplastics in the oceans. And here's a question that's coming from Fina. She says, what are the health risks of eating foods that are contaminated by microplastics? She's asking it specifically, are the small rubbish plastic pieces okay in your garden? So there's that issue of plastics in the soil. But then also, you know, what about microplastics in the sea that are being consumed by fish that are, you know, how does that affect the fish? And then, of course, they're just a low part on the food chain. What happens as it moves up and eventually comes to humans? So Nicole, I imagine this is something you've looked at. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to, and also open it up to Heather and Joachim. We know that, so the additives to plastic that Heather mentioned earlier can leach out of plastic in marine environments and attach on to other pollutants, making these crazy little pollutant packages that animals can ingest. And we know that we find those chemicals in animals, and we find those chemicals in animals that we eat. And we know that as you escalate up the food chain, there's more bioaccumulation of some of these chemicals. And this is a simplistic way of putting it. At least the last I dug deeply into the research, there was still this, what's the word I want to use? Hesitation or blindness being put out by some of our federal institutions and some of the scientific bodies about whether or not we can actually prove that because the fish ate microplastic and we ate the fish, that is microplastic in our bodies. And to me, that comes down to politics and semantics. I think functionally, we know we're ingesting plastic, and we've known it for a long time. And the soil is a great question that I wanna briefly address, because it's a big problem here is when we have a green waste composting bin. We don't have a food waste composting system, but we can compost leaves and yard scraps. People put plastic bags into those, in particular landscaping companies. And so if you can imagine the sorting mess at the end when those containers are received by our composters, there's shreds of plastic bags everywhere. So one of the things we can do to prevent that, because it is a problem when plastic's in our soil, is to make sure we're not putting plastic into our composting systems. And that will go a long way.
Okay, all right. Let's see, we've gotten a couple of other questions that have come in here. Here's a question from Thomas. Can the panelists summarize the changes in global recycling markets in recent years and how this has impacted past and present local recycling efforts and how local efforts may need to change in response? So basically, what's been happening in the global recycling markets? And I don't know, Joachim or Heather, one or the other of you who might want to take on that question.
Sure, I can. For a very long time, for 2 decades, we were sending a lot of our recyclables to China. And that's true from Hawaii, it's true from Washington, and it's true from Europe. And what was happening is we were sending bales of scraps of metal and plastics and paper and textiles in bales to China. It was cheaper to do that than to handle it in our own location. And then it was going all over China, and there were these little mom and pop operations as well as some big factories, but the little mom and pop operations were taking out what they could sell and they were burning or dumping the rest. And there's a movie called Plastic China, and you can just watch the 3-minute trailer online and it will shock you. So China in 2017, 2018 basically said, nope, no more. We are no longer going to take the wastes of the world. Boom. And they want to build their own circular economy and they want to clean up their environment. So it's a good thing. And what this has done is precipitated a huge crisis in recycling in Europe and in the US and all over, because now all of a sudden we don't have that outlet to send cheap to China to not even think about it anymore. So now there's a reckoning. And in Washington, so generally all over the world, it's believed that only about 9% of plastic is recycled. That's kind of the general stat. In Washington, we have a little bit better number. We have 17% of our residential plastic is being recycled. So that's not terrible, but it's not nearly what it should be in terms of the desire to basically, if you're gonna use plastic, let's make it recyclable. Let's not use it if we don't have to. So that's our starting point. Glass generally is very recyclable, but it's heavy. So that's a challenge. Metal is very recyclable, and it's very energy efficient to do, like, say, beer cans. That is one of the best things to recycle from an energy perspective, and from the avoidance of the extraction of the material in the first place. And paper has been the driver. That has been the economic driver for the recycling system. And we have in our case, we have can I read my writing? A 48% recycling rate in our state, which is pretty good. We are also a pulp and paper, we're a timber state. So we have that kind of infrastructure already set up. So basically we've had this crisis, and it's really, I think, a good thing, because it's caused all of us at the local level to think, what are we going to do to fix this system, including reducing, but then if we're going to have it, let's recycle it well and responsibly, and not have all the toxic impacts and the impacts on the workers, safety issues, and then all the downstream issues. So I'm not sure I quite answered his question, other than to say that we have had a reckoning that happened in the last 2 years.
Well, that's really interesting, though, because I would guess that many people might not be aware of that, and it's, you know, it sort of magnifies to an even greater extent the issue of plastic, because if even that little bit of it that was being recycled is no longer being recycled, then that's just more for the environment to absorb. Nicole, do you have any current statistics on how much of, particularly plastic, if you have it, but really other forms of waste too, if anything is known about how much in Hawaii is actually being recycled these days?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it differs by county. So I have Honolulu stats up now, and this island is where a vast majority of the waste is created. So we say about 34% of our waste stream was recycled in 2019. And where that gets, so what that means is it was collected by a MRF. We don't do any local recycling. A MRF is a materials recovery facility. And then it was shipped, in the case of glass, sometimes to California, but mostly to China, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates sometimes buys our recycling. So there's all these channels that, as the public, we're not actually authorized to see. It's considered proprietary business information between the recyclers and the folks who buy their stuff. So we know it leaves our island, and we don't have great accountability about what happens once it lands. So sure, we're sending 30-some-odd% of our stuff away, but is it actually getting recycled is an outstanding question. And one other piece to mention there, I noticed this in the questions, is, you know, can we only recycle plastic number 1 here? So generally in Hawaii, plastic number 1 and plastic number 2 is being taken. Depending on which county you're in, that might only be bottles. Some counties are still taking, like, the number 1 salad containers you might get at Safeway with your arugula in it. The best way to find that out is to go to your county's websites. And that's where you're going to have the most accurate and up-to-date information on what's being accepted. And remember that that's always going to change based on the contracts that the county has with the people who help us recycle and what is valuable on the market. And that causes a lot of confusion, because a few years ago, we could put number 5 plastic in our recycling bin, and today we can't. And so what you get is people wish cycling and putting the things in that used to be viable and no longer are economically viable, which is a whole nother conversation. And that causes damage and creates the problem Heather mentioned, where we're sending these bales of invaluable stuff overseas.
Yeah. Well, we have 5 minutes left in our conversation. So as a closing thought, I would like to ask each one of you, if you were to identify one thing, the one thing that you think could be most valuable for helping to address the plastic. I don't think it's an exaggeration to call it a crisis. What would that one thing be? Joachim, do you want to start us off?
As I'm a believer in extended producer responsibility, of course, if I just have one choice, I would vote for extended producer responsibility, that industry all over the world in each country is positively discussing and evaluating if this is not a tool they should choose to solve a problem for which they are partly responsible. And I think if we would be able to have a situation like in Belgium, all over the world, in each and every country, I think we could reduce the problem already dramatically, plus several others. But this would be, I think, a big step, a jump forward in the fight for a better environment.
Okay, that's great. Heather, how about you?
Well, I'll have to say that and. So my big thing is waste prevention. So I would say reuse systems, get them in place, get them going. That is going to be a major way to reduce the use of plastics.
Okay, and Nicole?
Yes, and yes. And I'll say also keeping your producers accountable. What you buy and how you consume is a piece of the puzzle, and letting the folks you're buying your products from know that you prefer less packaging, less plastic, will go a long way in helping them make the changes they need to make. And piggying back to what Heather said, we're actually getting ready to launch a reusable takeout container program on the island of Oahu. It's called Full Cycle Takeout. So you can find it on our website. So we're trying this out here. It's not going to be perfect to start with, but it's going to be a great start, and we're excited about it.
I want to ask you a follow-up question, because that's a really intriguing idea, that people can let producers know that they'd like to see less or different packaging. How do you suggest people actually go about doing that?
Lots of ways. So social media is powerful. If you're finding a lot of wrappers from a certain brand as you're walking around your neighborhood, feel free to tag them and let them know. Literati is one app that's helping to accumulate data and send it to producers like, XYZ company. We found that most of the trash in their streets is from your products. I'm forgetting, why am I forgetting the Break Free from Plastics, I believe, is the group who's done a big brand audit recently and identified the top 10 producers responsible for waste. And that's because of their public data collection program where you can input what you're finding. So those are 3 ways to do it. Good old social media tag is real powerful.
Okay. That's great. Well, I want to thank all 3 of you for coming and talking with us today. I mean, I really, people might not necessarily think about an extended conversation on plastic, but clearly it's just a part, it's virtually impossible to get it out of our lives, and it's there every day. So this question, and it has a long, long life. So thank you all for the work that you are doing to draw attention to that and to try and improve the systems and make things better. And thank you so much for being with us today. I want to thank the viewers for being with us, for your questions, for your comments. And please join us again next time, Civil Beat Ideas Live. Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Bye-bye.